So I want to talk about this. Evolution, unless you have some comments on the iPad. Okay. I want to talk about evolution. Last time, on Monday, we talked about innovation. So innovation is the thing that changes something, changes the performance, changes some new thing. Apple iBook reader is definitely an innovation. It will change the performance of textbooks. They're going to be better. What I want to do now is I want to zoom out, and I want to look at the long-term trends when you look at a timeline. So you look at a timeline and you see something happening. But to recap what we were talking about on Monday, ideas, they build upon ideas. Think about this. Every generation of technology becomes a source for new invention. This is sort of evolution. This is an evolutionary process. There's generation, just like in biology, generation, next generation, and so on. Some technology dies, new technology comes along, and so on. We talked about the adjacent possible. This is where we are at any given time. You can go back in history and see, at this time, something happened. Because when you had this enabling layer, you could build other things. And like I explained, this is like a platform or room that you're in, and you can open doors. And with anything that you have today, you can build something new. And we also talked that if you are seeing something new, it's probably has been in the lab for some time. Remember the long nose. We also talked about the liquid network, that when ideas come together, different minds come together, some innovation happened. But it's also built on slow hunts. It's not the eureka moment. More often it's something that people are thinking about for a long time. And finally, we also talked about serendipity, just to recap those terms. So the sort of something pleasantly interesting comes when you are trying to do something but upon accident, or an algorithm selected it for you. You get this serendipitous experience. You were not exactly looking for this, but here's something new that you didn't know about. Many inventions were discovered by accident. That's the point. So evolution. How does evolution handle technology? How does technology evolve over time? The first thing to observe is that it happens in cycles. And this is the S-curve. And something is new. So that's sort of like the springtime. And then it gets more performance increases. So it's growing rapidly for the time being. That's sort of the summertime, and then it sort of stops growing. We have squeezed the maximum out of this technology, and it might decline and fade away, or it becomes so mature that nobody's thinking about it. It's just a commodity. You don't think about it as technology anymore. It's just an enabling layer right there. So there are different theories on this, but the study of innovation can be applied to different things. It can be applied to industries. So you can see industries get born and then they get mature or they disappear. Paradigms, thinkings, technologies, products, and we can apply this on different things. One thing that I want to introduce to you was made by this guy. This is a guy, a Russian economist. He created the new economic program for Lenin, state capitalism, which is coming back according to yesterday's Economist. But he made an observation on technology. So this guy was actually born in 1892. So he's in the early 20th century doing his research. He published a paper about what he called the contractive wave, or it was called the contractive wave, which is that technology innovation are in long cycles, 40 to 60 years, each representing an application of a new group of technologies which eventually will lead to another wave. Sounds familiar? So generations. And he observed this over a long time. So you have these waves. Now he put it as waves. There's actually a flaw in this, that it sounds like they are going down, but it doesn't have to be. If you take this and tilt it a little bit, going up, it might make more sense. But this is his theory. So P there is the summer, everything's happening, and then R is the autumn, and then D is the winter, and everything is declining or dying, or it's mature, and then spring again in some new technology. So it goes in these cycles. So that was his theory, and he has these big points here. The first industrial revolution is the contractive number 1, 1787 to 1842, industrial revolution. Then the railroad came. So after the industrial revolution, the railroad became possible and actually needed. Steam engine comes, and with the steam engine, some new technology comes. And then steel comes, and then a whole new category of invention come out of that. Electricity. Electricity was the enabling layer for the telephone, the vacuum cleaner, for a lot of things. So this comes in cycles. But it doesn't mean that steel industry has to die for the next wave. It just becomes sort of an enabling layer for the next generation. Post-war boom, suburbia. We are now in number 5. I'm not sure if it has ended. I haven't seen that. We are in the information technology. Maybe something is coming along. But this is his views on waves. And then if we examine this a little bit, look at innovations, there are actually 3 stages to this, even if he's talking about 4 there. So, first of all, there's slow growth, and this could be for a very long time. The slow growth can last for a pretty long time. Now, then what happened is we will see rapid growth. This technology is now on the stage where improvements are substantial. Every effort you make to improve the product, it gets very good. But then the amount of improvements will decline, level off. The growth rate will decline. So it levels off, and this thing, product, technology, paradigm, will stabilize. And this is what we call the technology S-curve. And the technology S-curve is something like this. The product is very new, but then the improvements, they come along, rapid improvements, and then you can't squeeze more out of this. And we have several examples, and I want to take one example. Sorry about this. The digital revolution. The first computers were actually built using vacuum tubes. Some tubes. You've probably seen this in old radios, if you've seen this. I remember this from old radios when I was growing up. This was in the TVs a long time ago. And then they managed to squeeze some performance out of these computers, but they couldn't build them anymore because they needed more vacuum tubes. And the first computer they built, I think they had 30,000 vacuum tubes. So it was always breaking down. And you can't scale this. It gets too big. You need a whole city to get the right power. And you can't squeeze more out of it. So the technology matures and then it levels off. You can't squeeze more out of this. And even, these, I mean, if you have a digital watch, it's more powerful, way times more powerful than the first computers. But that was the start. So the digital revolution. So what happened in 1947, this is in the wartime, and we will talk about this when we talk about computers. This group of people, Shockley, Barton, and Bratton, a group of 3 scientists, they built the first practical transistor. So the transistors came, new S-curves comes along. replaces the old one, and continues the growth. And people could build transistor computers. And these were the computers that was in the space program. And having done this, they squeezed everything out of it. And there's actually a problem, a famous problem, that was called the tyranny of the numbers. They couldn't wire these things together. There were so many transistors, they all had to be wired together. It was a mess. So then somebody came up with the idea of integrated circuit. And the integrated circuit was invented by two guys, Jack Kilby of Texas Instruments in '59, and then Robert Noyce of Fairchild Semiconductor, '61. So they both developed this in separate. So think about it. Both of them were doing the same thing. They were not talking to each other, so there was not liquid network there. But they were both with the same idea. Why? Because the adjacent possible said, now is the time for, we have all the enabling layers to build integrated sockets. So somebody came up with the ideas, actually two guys, these Kilby and Noyce. Robert Noyce, he went to found a company with Gordon Moore. And they were actually, the joke is that they were going to call it Moore Noyce, but decided not to. So they called it Intel. And in '71, this chip came out. This was not the chip that changed the world, but it was the first chip. But when the chips came, the adjacent possible said, whoa, now we can do stuff. What do you think was the thing that took off when they had the chip? Computers? Not exactly. They did, but before that, calculators. Calculators, so that you take to school. People who have to make calculators. Boom, a whole new industry took off. Adjacent possibles. Now it's possible to make these calculators. So then observe this, the evolution. So computers in 1964. This is the revolutionary, great machine, IBM System 360, which was a suite of machine, brilliant idea, mainframe computer. It had 24K of memory. Now, I did a test yesterday. I went and got the IBM logo, and it was 28K. So the whole memory, you couldn't fit the logo in there. This is very interesting. But this was a brilliant design, because you could have small computer, medium, bigger, and still bigger, all running the same software. So it was a brilliant landmark innovation in the field of computers. And this is in '64. But then Gordon Moore, the guy that I mentioned, he was in the semiconductor business, and he made an observation I think it was in '65, that the number of transistors that you can place on an integrated circuit will double in 18 to 24 months. There's one word here that is a key that will explain evolutionary processes. This one. This is the key. And every time you have something that doubles, you have technology growth that accelerates. And this is the observation we can make about technology evolution. It accelerates. And it means that it goes like this. Exponential. And if we look at this, if we look at the transistors if you look at this is on a logarithmic scale. So it should actually be like the curve that you saw. But if you put it on a logarithmic scale, put down all the release dates of all these computers and how much power they have, transistor count, they form a line. So we are doubling every 2 years the performance of these things. The problem is that it's not easy to understand this. So when you're looking at technology, like I'm saying that in 10 years we're going to have, 5 steps? No, we're going to have much more, because it's going to grow exponentially. So that's why we have millionfold. No, it's actually billionfold improvement in 30 steps. The first steps is not going to change anything. But when you have 30 years, if it changes every year for 30 years, that's a billion improvement in 30 years. So the 5 paradigms of computers, you have punch cards, so I don't know what this is, relay switches, vacuum tubes, transistors, integrated circuit, and that is running out of steam. And this is why you have things like this. So let's stop here and take a break. And after we take a break, we're going to play a game, and I'm going to tell you a story. Okay, exponential growth. One example, we've looked at this before. There are other examples, like this one. iPad 2 came out last year. Now, there were some scientists that went back and saw, how much power is in this computer. So they found the Cray 2 supercomputer, which is big enough to have this in the middle is the Cray computer itself, and there are some storage units. So you need a room for this. Very, very expensive. And now you can buy it, more power, similar power, in a tablet some few years later. And this probably has some consequences. And if you look at the next 10 years, this is going to continue. So in 10 years, you're going to have a device that is going to be way more powerful than anything we have seen ever before. And this is the exponential growth. Now, the reason why it's difficult to comprehend this is because we think so linear. We think in steps. But actually, this evolves exponentially. That's the problem. And sometimes people talk about the second half of the chessboard. So if you look at the iterations, nothing's happening for the first few steps. But then, when you come to the second half of the chessboard, for example, 30, 31 iterations, 32, and then you go into 33, which is on the second half, something happens. And the amount of increase is so great. So you have billion by the time you get to 30. And this is a story that I want to tell you. The legend of the Ambalappuzha Paal Payasam. You probably heard this story. I'm not sure if I pronounced this correctly, but you probably heard this story. And this was a story, a legend. This is an Indian town. And the story says that according to legend, Lord Krishna once appeared in the form of a sage, which is kind of a wizard, something like that, in the court of a king who ruled the region and challenged him for a game of chess. The king was very much into chess and gladly accepted. The prize had to be decided before the game, and the king asked the sage to choose his prize in case he wins. The sage told the king that he had very modest claim, and being a man of few material need, all he wished was a few grains of rice. The amount of rice shall be determined by using the chessboard in the following manner. So you put 1 rice on the first square, and then 2 on the second, 4 on the third, then 8, 16, so you get the picture, and so on. And every square will have the double number of rice on the previous square. So upon hearing the demand, the king was of course very unhappy. This is, he's not asking for that much. But he demanded, you have to pick some, we have riches, you have to pick something more. And he said, no, this is fine for me. And then they played the game, and of course the king lost. So, being a man of his word, he asked the royal granary to come and settle the debt. And they did. So they started to put grains of rice on each. And by the time they came to the 20th square, they realized they don't have enough rice. Because they would need 1 million grains. And when you come to the 40th, they would need 1 trillion. And then they played the game, and of course the king lost. So, being a man of his word, he asked the royal granary to come and settle the debt. And they did. So they started to put grains of rice on each. And by the time they came to the 20th square, they realized they don't have enough rice. Because they would need 1 million grains. And when you come to the 40th, they would need 1 trillion. So if you take all the rice in India, they couldn't fill the chessboard. If they took all the grain in the world, they couldn't do it. So if they took all the rice, so if you would cover India, the whole country of India, with 2 meters of rice, that's the amount to fill the square of a chessboard. The lesson here is exponential growth. So here you can see it. 1, then 2, 4, then 8, 16, 32, and you can see as it goes. Then you come into the second half, 4G, 4 gigabytes, if you look at it in terms of computing. So in square number 30 is 1G, 31 is 2G, 4G, 8, 16 or 17, and then so on. This is exponential growth. And this is what Moore's law is telling us. And this is spooky. This is how technology evolves. Moore's law says that things will double. But what does that mean? What does Moore's law actually mean to us as consumers? Well, it means that exponential growth, computers will be faster, much faster. Now we can do the same thing as this guy that had the Cray, paid millions of dollars for it. But they will also be smaller. And we've seen that. This is much more powerful than some of the supercomputers in the 90s, 80s. Much more powerful. They filled our room. This goes in my pocket, and I take it anywhere I go. They will also be cheaper. The prices of bandwidth, storage, everything that is exponential always gets cheaper. And things that and they will also be everywhere. There's another law, Metcalfe's law, that we will talk about, says that the value of networks is the square of the number of people in the network. So it grows. So there's value in networks. So computers will be everywhere. We have multiple computers, every one of us. Phones, the washing machine is a computer. The car has several computers. So things that once were possible become possible. And I want to show you a cartoon. What's this?
The Dick Tracy Show. Okay, Chief. I'll get on it right away. Dick Tracy calling Hemlock Holmes, calling Hemlock Holmes.
Hemlock Holmes to Dick Tracy, go ahead.
Famous Purple Boy painting stolen from Art Museum, valued at $1 million. Crooks last seen heading south on 101 in a white panel truck. Nab them before they cross the border.
Don't worry, Tracy. I'll encircle them, throw a loop around them. I'll tighten the noose. I'll...
Good, Hemlock. We're depending on you. 6-2 and even. Over and out.
Two-way radio, introduced by this guy, Chester Gould, that made the Dick Tracy Show. It started in 31, but it was and ran all the way until 70 something. Two-way radio, but they couldn't make it. They had the idea, but they couldn't make it. So until 2009, 63 years later, they could actually make this.
Hey folks, Brian Cooley here at CES 2009 with Nathan Friedman from LG, but I like to call him Dick Tracy because he has the thing we've always waited for in the tech industry, the wristwatch that does it all. In this case, it's the watch phone from LG. So super secret and so fresh and cool, I'm not even allowed to touch it. It has to stay on his wrist. You gotta like that. Now check it out. Really nice high-res color screen, and it's a touch screen also. If you look at it, you'll see there's a media player, a whole bunch of other features you'd expect from, I think, the class that we'd call rich media phones. How does it work? Well, you dial with the touchscreen, and I was kind of skeptical. What are the buttons like? Are they doable? Nathan's going to actually pull up the dialing screen here, and we'll see. You don't need a stylus. I thought you would have, but it appears that with a finger, you're able to get those buttons and do so with enough accuracy to actually dial. Now, this thing is loaded up with features. I'm not allowed to touch it. It's got Bluetooth and Bluetooth stereo streaming. You've got voice recognition to speak commands to it. Also text-to-speech, so it can audio play messages that come in, things of that nature. As I mentioned, you've got a media player in there. That screen, by the way, is 1.43 inches in diagonal size, and it's used in that portrait mode as you see. But again, clarity is everything, so to my eye, it's pretty usable, even though it's rather small. The downside for us here in the U.S. is there are no plans for U.S. distribution just yet, but it'll be hitting the European market late this year. They got to bring it here. Again, that's the LG Watch phone seen here for the first time at CES 2009. I'm Brian Cooley. I'm not even allowed to touch it.
So he was really skeptical that this might work. 3 years ago, people were really skeptical about touching something. But now I mean, it's obvious. I mean, for these devices, it's natural. I mean, kids today, if they see a photograph and it doesn't work, it's broken. You know, touching is natural. So evolutionary processes, they tend to accelerate. Do you see a lot of people with these watches? Maybe people don't want to talk to their watch. I don't know. But that's how it is. Okay, so we have 15 minutes left. I have one video that I want to show you. This is Ray Kurzweil. He's a guy that talks a lot about technology, and he's talking about this acceleration. I think this is like 7 minutes or something. So Ray Kurzweil on technology and how it will transform us.
Kevin Kelly talked about the acceleration of technology. That's been a strong interest of mine and a theme that I've developed for some 30 years. I realized that my technologies had to make sense when I finished the project, then invariably the world was a different place when I would introduce a technology. And I noticed that most inventions fail, not because the R&D department can't get it to work. If you look at most business plans, they will actually succeed if given the opportunity to build what they say they're going to build. And 90% of those projects or more will fail because the timing is wrong. Not all the enabling factors will be in place when they're needed. So I began to be an ardent student of technology trends and track where technology would be at different points in time, and began to build mathematical models of that. It's kind of taken on a life of its own. I've got a group of 10 people that work with me to gather data on key measures of technology in many different areas, and we build models. And you'll hear people say, well, we can't predict the future. And if you ask me, will the price of Google be higher or lower than it is today 3 years from now? That's very hard to say. Will WiMAX, CDMA, G3 be the wireless standard 3 years from now? That's hard to say. But if you ask me what will it cost for 1 MIPS of computing in 2010, or the cost to sequence a base pair of DNA in 2012, or the cost of sending a megabyte of data wirelessly in 2014, it turns out that those are very predictable. There are remarkably smooth exponential curves that govern price, performance, capacity, bandwidth. And I'm going to show you a small sample of this, but there's really a theoretical reason why technology develops in an exponential fashion. And a lot of people, when they think about the future, think about it linearly. They think they're going to continue to develop a problem or address a problem using today's tools at today's pace of progress, and fail to take into consideration this exponential growth. The Genome Project was a controversial project in 1990. We had our best PhD students, our most advanced equipment around the world. We got 1/10,000th of the project done. So how are we going to get this done in 15 years? And 10 years into the project, the skeptics were still going strong. Says you're 2/3 through this project, and you've managed to only sequence a very tiny percentage of the whole genome. But it's the nature of exponential growth that once it reaches the knee of the curve, it explodes. Most of the project was done in the last few years of the project. It took us 15 years to sequence HIV. We sequenced SARS in 31 days. So we are gaining the potential to overcome these problems. I'm going to show you just a few examples of how pervasive this phenomena is. The actual paradigm shift rate, the rate of adopting new ideas, is doubling every decade according to our models. These are all logarithmic graphs. So as you go up the level, it represents generally multiplying by a factor of 10 or 100. It took us half a century to adopt the telephone, the first virtual reality technology. Cell phones were adopted in about 8 years. If you put different communication technologies on this logarithmic graph, television, radio, telephone were adopted in decades. Recent technologies like the PC, the web, cell phones were under a decade. Now this is an interesting chart, and this really gets at the fundamental reason why an evolutionary process, and both biology and technology are evolutionary processes, accelerate. They work through indirection, they create a capability, and then it uses that capability to bring on the next stage. So the first step in biological evolution, the evolution of DNA, actually it was RNA came first, took billions of years. But then evolution used that information processing backbone to bring on the next stage. So the Cambrian explosion, when all the body plans of the animals were evolved, took only 10 million years. It was 200 times faster. And then evolution used those body plans to evolve higher cognitive functions. And biological evolution kept accelerating. It's an inherent nature of an evolutionary process. So Homo sapiens, the first technology-creating species, a species that combined a cognitive function with an opposable appendage. And by the way, chimpanzees don't really have a very good opposable thumb. So we could actually manipulate our environment with a power grip and fine motor coordination and use our mental models to actually change the world and bring on technology. But anyway, the evolution of our species took hundreds of thousands of years. And then working through indirection, evolution used essentially the technology-creating species to bring on the next stage, which were the first steps in technological evolution. The first step took tens of thousands of years. Stone tools, fire, the wheel, kept accelerating. We always used then the latest generation of technology to create the next generation. Printing press took a century to be adopted. The first computers were designed pen on paper. Now we use computers. And we have had a continual acceleration of this process. Now, by the way, if you look at this on a linear graph, it looks like everything has just happened. But some observers says, well, Kurzweil just put points on this graph that fall on that straight line. So it took 15 different lists from key thinkers like the Encyclopedia Britannica, Museum of Natural History, Carl Sagan's Cosmic Calendar, on the same, and these people were not trying to make my point. These were just lists in reference works and thinkers, what they thought the key events were in biological evolution and technological evolution. And again, it forms the same straight line. You have a little bit of thickening in the line because people do have disagreements what the key points are. There's differences of opinion when agriculture started, how long the Cambrian explosion took. But you see a very clear trend. There's a basic, profound acceleration of this evolutionary process. Information technologies double their capacity, price performance, bandwidth every year. And that's a very profound explosion of exponential growth. Personal experience when I was at MIT, computer taking up about the size of this room, less powerful than the computer in your cell phone. But Moore's law, which is very often identified with this exponential growth, is just one example of many because it's basically a property of the evolutionary process of technology. I put 49 famous computers on this logarithmic graph. By the way, a straight line on a logarithmic graph is exponential growth. That's another exponential. It took us 3 years to double the price performance of computing in 1900, 2 years in the middle. We're now doubling it every 1 year. And that's exponential growth through 5 different paradigms. Moore's law was just the last part of that, where we were shrinking transistors on an integrated circuit. But we had electromechanical calculators, relay-based computers that cracked the German Enigma code, vacuum tubes in the 1950s predicted the election of Eisenhower, discrete transistors used in the first space flights, and then Moore's law. Every time one paradigm ran out of steam, another paradigm came out of left field to continue the exponential growth. They were shrinking vacuum tubes, making them smaller and smaller. That hit a wall. They couldn't shrink them and keep the vacuum. A whole different paradigm. Transistors came out of the woodwork. In fact, when we see the end of the line for a particular paradigm, it creates research pressure to create the next paradigm. And because we've been predicting the end of Moore's law for quite a long time, the first prediction said 2002, until now says 2022. But by the teen years, the features of transistors will be a few atoms in width, and we won't be able to shrink them anymore. That'll be the end of Moore's law, but it won't be the end of the exponential growth of computing, because chips are flat. We live in a 3-dimensional world. We might as well use the 3rd dimension. We will go into the 3rd dimension, and there's been tremendous progress just in the last few years of getting 3-dimensional, self-organizing molecular circuits to work. We'll have those ready well before Moore's law runs out of steam.
So he talked about interesting things. Timing is usually wrong. That's one thing, because it's difficult to see the exponential thing. There are also political issues and legal issues that make predictions really difficult also. But having listen to this. There is a law that this guy has, the law of accelerating returns, which says that evolution applies a positive feedback in that more capable methods resulting from one stage of evolutionary process are used to create the next stage. So you have something, the adjacent possible will tell you this is what you can do now, but this grows, this accelerates. As a result, the rate of progress of an evolutionary process increases, accelerates, like I talked about. And here's an interesting quote. He says that we won't experience 100 years of progress in the 21st century. It will be more like 20,000 years of progress in a 2 days rate. Sounds really scary, but this is how it works. And as we will go through the course, there are evidence of many inventions that are coming out of the lab. Okay, let's get back to the S-curve before we quit today. We talked about this, but what he was really saying was that you have paradigm shifts. You have new, and if we take the contractive waves and stack them up like this, it's more natural. So the technology S-curves keep this exponential growth going. And we have many examples. Here are more examples from this guy. This is the modem cost performance. This is almost line. This is more like a line memory, random access memory increasing exponentially. And this is wireless data services increasing exponentially. So we can say 2020, the bandwidth into your house, 2020, is going to be 10 gigabits if we project this. 10 gigabits. What is it now? 12, 16? It's going to be 10 gigabits if we project this. So let's talk about the technology life cycle a little bit. This is the notion when we are in the early phases of technology. Let me give you an example. So in the early days, a new technology comes along. For example, the PC. Who will buy this box? Well, that's the crazy people, the enthusiasts, the innovators that want to buy this. They are really into this. Your grandmother would not buy this unless she's in this category. But this is not a consumer product. So it's only for the technology enthusiasts. They will do whatever it takes. They don't mind. They don't mind if it's hard technology because it's so rough. But then it becomes more refined. And in the later days, normal people that are not particularly interested in computing, they start to use it. For example, when you had VisiCalc or spreadsheets or word processor, people started to buy those things. I need a computer, I need to do my homework. Not because I'm an enthusiast. So this is the technology adoption life cycle. As the technology improves, and then it sort of fades away because something else is taking over, the CD-ROM is fading away, and the DVD is coming, and then the DVD is fading away. Who will use it first? The innovators, the technology enthusiasts, and then the early adopters. I believe in this. Yeah, I think this is the future. Visionaries. I see where this is going. I believe this. And they will put up with inferior and rough products. But then, in the end, the big majority comes along. I mean, a few years ago, anybody could buy a computer. But it was only a few years ago. And then the laggards, Luddite skeptics that may have to do it if they want to survive. Okay, I'm going to skip a few points here that I will talk about them on Monday. But I want to mention this because this is perfect way into our next topic, which is disruption. Next time I'm going to talk about disruption, and I'm going to talk about Kodak. And I want you to read this article. I will put this article on the web. I want you to read it because I want to discuss it. So this is a reading assignment. And before you leave, think about this. Think about a technology. This is a study exercise. This is what you will have to write down. Think about a technology that has changed your life. You did not use that 10 years ago, 20 years ago when you were little. It changed something in your life. And there are lots of examples. And we will also talk about why Western Union turned down the telephone. And they made the right choice, according to good business management tradition, they made the right choice because they looked at all the data. But then the question is, why? Why did good management practice says you have to turn this down? So on Monday, we will talk about disruption. Okay. Have a nice weekend.